The story of Archie and Edith Bunker unfolds not just as a domestic comedy, but as a mirror reflecting the cultural unease of an America struggling with its own transformation. Beneath the laughter and banter of all in the family, there lies a portrait of a man watching his world erode piece by piece, his work, his marriage, and the illusion of control that once defined his masculinity. In this episode, that erosion takes on the shape of loneliness, temptation, and humiliation, the perfect trifecta of midlife collapse, in a world that no longer obeys his rules. Archie is not simply a husband. He is the emblem of the working-class patriarch whose self-worth is anchored in labor and authority. But when that authority is challenged first by a society moving toward equality, then by a wife who begins to find her own identity, his bluster becomes defense. The flirtation with Denise, the young waitress, is less about lust than about relevance. She laughs at his jokes, calls him cute, and makes him feel noticed. In her eyes, he sees the man he used to be strong, funny, desirable. In Edith's tired kindness, he sees the man he has become ordinary, predictable, fading. That contrast drives the episode's emotional tension. The humor in the early scenes masks something deeper, the erosion of communication. Archie hides behind jokes because they're safer than honesty. When he teases Edith about her volunteer work or complains about the Sunshine Home, he's really expressing a fear that she no longer needs him. She, on the other hand, fills her days caring for others because it's the only space left where her tenderness is valued. At home, her empathy meets sarcasm. At the nursing home, it heals people. The irony is brutal. When Edith leaves one night to help an elderly friend, Archie decides to seek comfort elsewhere. The visit to Denise's apartment is one of the show's most revealing moments. The awkwardness of his body language, the nervous laughter, the fidgeting with his hat, the clumsy attempts at seduction shows a man fighting not desire but his own conscience. The dialogue, full of pauses and half-finished thoughts, becomes a map of his internal conflict. He wants to be seen, admired, desired, but not by someone who will actually follow through. When the delivery boy catches him there and jokes about having a ball, Archie's fragile self-image shatters. He realizes that what he thought was a secret indulgence looks from the outside like a cliché, an aging man chasing youth. The laughter turns against him. That humiliation follows him home, where Edith's intuition takes over. She doesn't accuse, she asks. And each time he lies about bowling poker, helping a neighbor, the lies grow more desperate, more absurd. The moment she finds the piece of paper with the waitress's number, silence fills the space. In that silence, decades of unspoken emotion rise to the surface. Archie confesses in fragments, trying to control the narrative. It didn't mean nothing. He says a line that captures the blindness of his gender and generation. For him, meaning is tied to action. For Edith, meaning lives in intention. To think of betrayal is to commit it in the heart. Her decision to leave is not an act of vengeance. It is a declaration of selfhood. For years, she has been the invisible gravity holding his chaos together, the emotional laborer in a household that rarely acknowledged her work. The moment she walks out, the entire structure collapses. Archie's freedom, which he always claimed to want, arrives, and it terrifies him. Alone at Kelsey's bar, surrounded by men who mirror his bitterness, he jokes louder, drinks faster, and pretends harder. His old jokes sound hollow now. The men laugh out of habit, not amusement. In that laughter, he hears the echo of his own obsolescence. Meanwhile, at the Sunshine Home, Edith is surrounded by people who remind her of the fragility of time. Their arthritis, their dentures, their fading memories, all of it becomes a quiet metaphor for her marriage. Yet she finds joy there too, the joy of purpose, of usefulness. For the first time, she realizes that she doesn't have to be Archie's Edith, she can simply be Edith. That discovery, subtle, unannounced, is the beginning of her liberation. When Gloria visits her mother and urges reconciliation, Edith's logic is clear and painfully simple. He was thinking about doing what he said he didn't. Her words dismantle decades of denial. She doesn't need proof, she only needs to name the truth. For Gloria, raised in a more modern generation, forgiveness seems obvious. But Edith represents a quieter rebellion, one that demands emotional accountability, not through anger, but through withdrawal. She refuses to be the perpetual forgiver. The reunion scene on the porch is written like a slow dance of pride and longing. Two people who have built their lives together but forgotten how to talk without hurting each other finally share the same silence. Archie speaks first small talk about the color of the porch, his old shoulder pain, anything to avoid the subject. Edith listens patiently, as she always has. When she finally asks if the waitress was pretty, he flinches, not because of the question, but because of what it implies that she has imagined the moment he's too ashamed to describe. His repeated phrase, "It didn't mean nothing," no longer defends him, it condemns him. It shows that he's incapable of understanding the emotional currency of his actions. And yet Edith forgives not because he deserves it, but because she chooses to live without bitterness. The reenactment of their wedding vows is tender, awkward, and deeply American love expressed through humor apology disguised as laughter. "Do you take Archie Bunker until you can't take him no more?" he asks. Her answer, half teasing, half weary, sums up the survival instinct of every long marriage: "Until I can't take you no more." Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain. It simply allows life to continue. But the episode does not end there. In its final act, the show shifts from personal failure to systemic failure. Archie loses his job. The man who once defined himself by his ability to provide must now face the machinery of unemployment, the cold logic of bureaucracy that measures human worth in forms and identification numbers. The unemployment office scene is almost tragic in its humor. His exchanges with the clerk, "If the system can make a job for you, why can't it make one for me?" reveal the frustration of an entire generation left behind by economic change. The jokes about winos, hippies, and hookers aren't just prejudice. They are the language of a man trying to assign blame to a world he no longer understands. Archie's anger is both ridiculous and real. He has worked his whole life believing that effort equals dignity, yet now he's told to wait 4 weeks for a check that barely covers groceries. His masculinity, once bolstered by work and authority, is now humiliated by dependence. The irony of the scene is that even in his ignorance, Archie articulates the rage of the American worker in decline. He is a fool, but a prophetic one, a man who senses that the social contract has been broken. At home, Edith's response to his despair transforms their relationship. She does not scold or pity him. She simply reminds him that vulnerability is not weakness. "Everybody needs comfort and love," she says, "and that don't make you a baby. It makes you more of a man." It's a line that dismantles the entire myth of male stoicism. Archie for once listens. The man who once mocked feelings as feminine now admits his fear not just of poverty, but of irrelevance. Their embrace is not romantic, it's existential. Two people holding on to each other because the world outside has become too uncertain to stand alone. This episode, taken as a whole, functions as a meditation on aging class and gender in 1,970 seconds America. The economic backdrop, factory closures, inflation, the decline of manufacturing, creates the external pressure that mirrors the internal collapse of the Bunker household. Archie's struggle for respect echoes the national anxiety of a society shifting from production to service, from patriarchy to equality, from certainty to confusion. Edith's awakening, meanwhile, prefigures the feminist consciousness that was redefining women's roles during that decade. Her discovery that there's something else I can count on me is as revolutionary in its quiet way as any protest or slogan of the era. The genius of All in the Family lies in its refusal to moralize. It doesn't punish Archie for his flaws, nor does it glorify Edith for her patience. Instead, it allows both to exist in the messy gray space of humanity. Archie's bigotry, insecurity, and stubbornness coexist with his loyalty, humor, and capacity for change. Edith's gentleness, often mistaken for weakness, becomes a source of power, the power to forgive, to endure, and to define herself without hatred. Together, they embody a paradox, a couple bound by love and limited by fear, constantly hurting each other but unable to live apart. By the end, when they sit side by side, the laughter track fades into something almost sacred. The audience is no longer laughing at Archie, but watching him wrestle with the same question every generation faces: how to adapt without losing oneself. The closing lines, his halting declaration of love, her quiet reply, capture the essence of the show's moral vision. Love in this universe is not grand or romantic, it is survival. It is two imperfect people choosing day after day not to give up. When the credits roll and the familiar theme returns, boy, the way Glenn Miller played It no longer sounds like nostalgia for simpler times. It feels like mourning for an innocence that never really existed. The America Archie misses, where men were men and girls were girls, is the same America that excluded, silenced, and divided. Yet his longing for it is not malicious, it's human. He represents the pain of change, the confusion of progress, and the stubborn hope that somehow things can still make sense. All in the Family remains powerful because it exposes that contradiction without resolving it. The show never asks us to love Archie, only to recognize him in ourselves, the part that fears being left behind, the part that clings to certainty, the part that mistakes control for love. Through laughter and discomfort, it teaches empathy without absolution. And through Edith's quiet resilience, it shows that grace, the kind that forgives without forgetting, can be the most radical form of strength. In the end, Archie and Edith's story is not about sin and redemption, but about endurance. Theirs is a marriage built on the fragile architecture of habit, laughter, and the refusal to let go. They argue they hurt, they age, but they remain two flawed souls tethered together by the simple, stubborn fact of love. In their world of cheap, beer-fading jobs and worn-out furniture, that love becomes the only thing that still holds value. And in a nation losing faith in its promises, that may be the truest story of all. The story of Archie and Edith Bunker is not just a domestic drama. It is a social document, one that captures the ache of a country caught between two centuries. Through humor and humiliation, All in the Family became a mirror held up to America's working class, and few episodes show that mirror more clearly than this one. Beneath the laughter, there is a meditation on class, gender, and the slow unspooling of male authority in an age of uncertainty. Archie Bunker, the self-appointed patriarch of his household and of a vanishing way of life, is a man defined by work. His identity is rooted not in who he loves, but in what he does. For 3 decades, he has clocked in at the same loading dock, believing that loyalty equals dignity. When the world around him begins to change, when women work, when minorities demand rights, when factories shrink and management speaks in euphemisms, Archie reacts the only way he knows how, by retreating into sarcasm and nostalgia. The past to him is not just memory. It is a weapon against irrelevance. Edith, by contrast, represents a softer but no less radical shift. She is the emotional laborer of the family, the woman who smooths every rough edge, who apologizes when Archie insults the neighbors, who still believes in kindness as an organizing principle of life. Yet, this episode shows her quietly stepping out of his shadow. Her volunteer work at the Sunshine Home is more than charity, it is emancipation. There, she is no longer Archie's wife. She is Edith, the one who listens, comforts, and leads. Her world expands just as his contracts. The flirtation with Denise, the young waitress, is therefore more symbolic than sexual. It's not really about desire, it's about power. Denise laughs at Archie's jokes, validates his manhood, and for a moment restores the illusion of control. She is young, modern, working independent, the very type of woman Archie publicly mocks but privately craves approval from. Their brief encounter in her apartment becomes a compressed allegory of male insecurity in a feminist age. When the beer delivery boy enters the scene, he represents the generational gaze of America itself. Youth observing age the future, smirking at the past. His line, "Have yourself a ball," detonates Archie's fantasy. Suddenly, the patriarch sees himself not as the hero of his own story, but as its punchline. He leaves before the act can become sin, but morally, the boundary has already been crossed. The laughter of the audience turns uneasy. We are not laughing with Archie anymore, we are laughing at him, and he feels it. At home, the confrontation with Edith plays out like a courtroom drama without lawyers. She does not raise her voice. She simply asks, "Where were you? Whose number is this? Was she pretty?" Her calmness is devastating because it denies Archie the chaos he thrives on. His defense collapses under its own absurdity. First bowling, then poker, then groceries. The lies sound like lines from a dying script of male excuses. When he finally admits the truth, it didn't mean nothing. He reveals the moral blindness of an entire generation that mistook emotional betrayal for harmless fun. Edith's departure is quiet, but revolutionary. For a woman of her background, a post-war housewife in Queens, to leave home even temporarily is an act of protest as radical as any march. She doesn't slam doors, she simply walks away, forcing Archie to live with silence. That silence in the cultural lexicon of the 1,970 seconds is the sound of patriarchy losing its echo. At Kelsey's bar, the working-class cathedral of male escape, Archie tries to rebuild his sense of belonging. Surrounded by men who drink away their disappointments, he performs the old rituals of camaraderie, jokes, complaints, laughter. But the laughter no longer heals. It mocks. The industrial America that once made these men necessary is collapsing around them. Their hands trained to lift crates and swing hammers have no use in a world of paperwork and automation. Archie's job loss later in the episode is not an accident of plot. It is the historical inevitability of the deindustrialized nation. Meanwhile, Edith's new environment, the Sunshine Home, becomes a metaphor for resilience. Among the elderly, she finds purpose. Her kindness, once taken for granted, becomes a skill. The very qualities that made her invisible at home, patience, empathy, steadiness, are what make her indispensable here. In the macrocosm of the American social shift, she personifies the transformation of feminine virtue into agency. The episode's middle act, where Gloria visits Edith, deepens the generational conversation. Gloria belongs to the post-pill America, where women debate liberation openly. Edith's feminism, if one can call it, that is intuitive rather than ideological. She doesn't speak the language of empowerment, she lives it quietly. When she tells Gloria, even if he didn't do what he said, he was thinking about doing it. She's articulating a moral philosophy that transcends feminism. It's the ethic of emotional truth. Archie's visit to Edith later on is one of the most understated yet powerful reconciliations in television history. The porch scene, bathed in the stillness of an aging evening, strips away the sitcom artifice. There is no audience laughter, no punchline, only two people confronting the wreckage of their shared years. Archie speaks of trivialities, paint colors, shoulder pain, because he cannot yet speak of guilt. Edith's simple question, was she pretty, cuts through all of that. The brilliance of her line lies in its simplicity. She is not seeking comparison. She is seeking honesty. His reply, it didn't mean nothing, is the same line he's used before, but now it trembles. It no longer protects him, it exposes him. Edith's answer, it meant something to me, is the pivot. In that moment, she stops being the victim and becomes the moral center. When Archie re-proposes to her with the mock vows, do you, Edith Baines, take Archie Bunker to be your lawfully wedded husband until you can't take him no more? It's both satire and sincerity. The humor is a disguise for vulnerability. What he's really asking is, can you still love me knowing who I am? And what she's answering between laughter and exhaustion is, I already do, but differently now. Then comes the layoff. The news hits him like a personal betrayal. After decades of labor, he is discarded by the very system he defended. The unemployment office scene distills the moral absurdity of the era. Archie, the embodiment of blue-collar loyalty, is now a supplicant in a bureaucratic maze. His outburst, if the system can make a job for you, why can't it make one for me, is not ignorance, it's clarity. In one sentence, he exposes the hypocrisy of a capitalist order that praises work but punishes workers. The clerk, young and detached, represents the new meritocracy, educated, polite, efficient, but emotionally sterile. The generational gap is not only cultural, it's structural. She belongs to the service economy that replaced his industrial one. For her, labor is a process. For him, it's a creed. The scene, though, played for laughs, forecasts the social alienation that would define post-industrial America. When Archie returns home defeated, Edith becomes his sanctuary. She doesn't offer solutions, only presence. Her line, everybody needs comfort and love, and that don't make you a baby. It makes you more of a man, is the episode's moral thesis. It dismantles the myth of stoic masculinity and replaces it with an ethic of vulnerability. Together, they sit aging embodiments of a nation still trying to learn empathy. Their marriage, like America itself, survives not because it's perfect, but because it adapts. In Edith's forgiveness, we see not submission, but wisdom. In Archie's surrender, not weakness, but growth. Viewed in historical context, the episode aired during a time when the United States was grappling with inflation, unemployment, and shifting social norms. The 1,970 seconds marked the twilight of the manufacturing middle class, the very demographic that Archie represents. At the same time, women like Edith were entering the workforce, volunteering, and discovering identities beyond domesticity. The tension between these two forces, economic decline and personal awakening, drives both the story and the decade. All in the Family uses humor as anesthesia for pain. The audience laughs to avoid crying, because what unfolds on screen is too familiar: the fear of becoming irrelevant, the humiliation of losing control, the bittersweet endurance of long marriages built more on survival than romance. The genius of the show lies in its refusal to choose sides. Archie is both villain and victim, a man shaped by his time and undone by it. Edith is both saint and realist, her goodness no longer naivety but defiance. Together they illustrate an uncomfortable truth: love does not erase inequality, but it can transcend it. When the closing theme plays, those were the days the nostalgia feels ironic. The days being mourned were not better, merely simpler for those who benefited from them. The show invites us to recognize that the past Archie longs for was built on silence. Women's silence, worker silence. The silence of everyone told to know their place. By giving Edith a voice, the episode symbolically breaks that silence. And yet, All in the Family never abandons compassion. It understands that progress comes with casualties. Archie is one of them, a man left behind not by malice but by momentum. In his fumbling apology, his clumsy jokes, his desperate need for Edith's love, we glimpse the pain of an entire generation watching the ground shift beneath its feet. The final image, Archie and Edith side by side in their worn-out living room, encapsulates the paradox of America itself. The furniture is old, the dreams are frayed, but the love, though weathered, endures. Theirs is not a happy ending, but it is an honest one. In that honesty lies the show's enduring relevance. Half a century later, the questions it raises still echo. What happens to identity when work disappears? What happens to love when equality arrives? And what happens to a nation when the people who built it no longer recognize it? Archie and Edith never find perfect answers, but in their imperfect grace and her quiet forgiveness and his grudging humility, they give us something rarer: the courage to face change without losing our humanity.